Good day and welcome to this week's GavCal research video. We're here with Vincent, GavCal's founding partner. Now, Louis, a few hours ago in Washington, the US House of Representatives approved a bill that would force the Chinese tech company ByteDance to divest its TikTok platform in the US. This seems like a very aggressive move. How are you reading it?
It is a very aggressive move. Thanks for having me on, Tom. Look, I think you can go so many different directions with this. The temptation is, of course, to reach for one soapbox, and I will give into that temptation for just a minute, and then I'll go into perhaps the investment consequences, which probably matters more than anything else to our investors. But the reason I feel decently comfortable reaching for my soapbox is, even though I'm not American, my wife is American, my children are American, and I've always considered myself a free speech absolutist. And for me, free speech has historically been the massive comparative advantage of Anglo-Saxon societies in general. A long history of free speech protection against governments, and the temptation of governments everywhere is always to try and control free speech. The simplest way to do it, of course, is through claiming national security threats, and failing that, another good one, obviously, is, we need to protect the children. On this note, I brought my copy of Capitalism and Freedom by Milton Friedman for this interview. I don't want to brag, but dedicated by the great man himself. And I'll just highlight one passage that I think is relevant to today. Milton Friedman writes, from 1933 to the outbreak of World War II, Churchill was not permitted to talk over the British radio, which was, of course, a government monopoly administered by the BBC. So here was a leading citizen of his country, a member of parliament, a former cabinet minister, a man who was desperately trying by every device possible to persuade his countrymen to prepare for the menace of Hitler's Germany, and he was not permitted to talk over the radio to the British people. Now, law of unintended consequences, of course, right? Because fast forward a few years, in 1938, Chamberlain ends up in Munich with an unprepared British army and unable to do much about Hitler's rise. So, I would have thought personally that after the debacle of governments controlling media during the pandemic, i.e., the banning of anyone who might suggest that the virus had more Pyrex in its DNA than pangolin, or the exclusion of anyone who suggested that the vaccine did not stop transmission, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. You would have thought that governments would have learned a lesson. They tried to control the media during the pandemic, and it blew up in their face. Instead, I think everywhere you care to look, you're seeing a doubling down, right? And forget TikTok for a second. If you want to see something really egregious, you go look north to the hate speech bill that Trudeau's pushing through right now. I mean, that hate speech bill that's going through Canada as we speak is just downright positively Orwellian. Anyway, I'll push back my soapbox for now, and let's discuss the investment consequences of this thing. The first, I think, for me, very obvious investment consequence of the TikTok ban is that this is the second time you're seeing an intervention of the US government in the broader big tech world. A couple of years ago, or actually 4 years ago now, the US government started telling the semiconductor industry what it could and could not sell to China. And now, of course, you're having an intervention in the broader social media space. Now, you may remember my top 10 charts per decade. I've overused it. I've used it in chart book after chart book, highlighting that in 1970s, it was all oil stocks. 80s, it was all Japanese stocks. 90s, it was all internet stocks. 2000s, China. And past 10 years, it's all big tech stocks. Now, one of the reasons things change is that as companies get very, very big, governments typically go after them. Petrobras, the taxes on the mining guys last time around in Australia, so on and so forth. So here we have, I think, a typical case of a very powerful sector, social media, and the government, coming in with its big boots and deciding to stomp all over it. Now, you could say, well, it's just TikTok, but you're creating precedents. Who's to know whether it's today TikTok and tomorrow? Why not YouTube? Why not Instagram? And I think here people forget that all these big tech companies basically banned Donald Trump from their platforms following January 6th. So, creating a precedent where the government can intervene in that sector, I think should send shivers down the spine of all executives all across these industries. So, the ban on TikTok could very well end up being a Pyrrhic victory for the likes of Facebook. So I'll highlight this. Just basically, my first take on this is more intervention in the big tech space, which is usually more government intervention in any space isn't really what you welcome. Secondly, and frankly, much more importantly for me, is that this is the second time in 2 years where foreign investors are basically being told they'll be judged on a different set of rules than domestic investors in the U.S. I think a couple years ago, you had the seizure of Russian assets, and today you have this. So I think the message that the U.S. Congress is essentially sending to the rest of the world, they're basically saying, look, a foreign dollar invested in the U.S. is not equal to a domestic dollar invested in the U.S. And they're saying this at a time when the U.S. is running record high twin deficits. So at a time when the U.S. needs to attract these foreign dollars to keep their show on the road, and essentially the U.S. Congress is saying, keep sending us your money and we'll tell you later what we think that money should be worth. And if we don't like your government, if we don't like your country, if there's anything a bit dodgy about you, your investment could be worth a zero or thereabouts. So given all of this, should we be surprised that we're seeing gold, silver, Bitcoin, even copper all breaking out? I think what you're seeing is, if you're sending the message to the rest of the world, look, your money here, we decide what it's worth, not the market. The consequences are people are going to try to find assets that are X market, i.e. gold, Bitcoin. And then I think finally, perhaps less importantly, but I think politically it'll be interesting to see the consequences of this decision. A lot of young people really like their TikTok. So, now you could say, well, they're not going to lose it because TikTok is going to sell itself to Instagram or to Google or to somebody. Perhaps maybe they shut it down. And if they completely shut it down for the U.S., how do U.S. young people react to this? How do all the users feel about it? So politically, this may yet be a charged decision. Anyways, lot to think about, but no doubt in my mind that both from a precedent basis, a civil liberty basis, an investment basis, this is just a catastrophic decision.
And presumably a decision that aims at reducing competition is seldom going to be a good thing.
You would think, right? I mean, in a time, this is what's so shocking, at a time when people already complain about the level of consolidation in that entire space. I think, between Google and Facebook, they control roughly half of the global advertising spend today. And you're in essence saying, like, let's take out the one competitor that has, really started to emerge in recent years. Let's kneecap that one competitor. Seems to me both short-sighted and dangerous.